Everyone, welcome to our meeting as Four Lakes Task Force. We're having an open meeting to discuss issues and concerns specific to Wixom Lake. This is the first meeting in a series of 4 meetings that we'll hold discussing issues and concerns specific to each of the 4 lakes. If you're interested in any of the other lakes meetings, you can go to our website under the meetings tab and find more information on that. Okay, so yeah, we're hosting this meeting virtually due to COVID restrictions, but we'll still allow for public questions and comments. And if you have any questions or comments, you can enter them in GoToWebinar underneath the questions tab and just type in your question, and we'll answer questions at the end of the meeting for about 30 minutes, and we'll try to get to all of them that we can. And so now I'll turn it over to Dave Rothman.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the meeting. We're going to cover 4 topics today. The first, we're going to hear from Dan Devon, who is with the State of Michigan Dam Safety Organization. He's going to talk to us about the Edenville Dam on the Tobacco River side. Then next, you're going to hear from Ron Hansen of Spicer Engineering, who's going to give you an update on the concept we have for reconstruction of the entire Edenville Dam to bring Wixom Lake back up. We'll follow that with a discussion about what's going on with erosion damage and erosion control around the lake. That's an active project right now for Four Lakes Task Force. Final topic is invasive weeds, which those of you who've been looking out at the lake bed have noticed things have started to grow. So we have to talk about that a little bit, and then we will have an open question and answer period on any of these topics. So with all of this said, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dan Devon with Michigan Dam Safety.
Thanks, Dave. So very briefly, as all of you are aware, the Edenville Dam, when it did breach, it breached on the Tittabawassee side, and that left the remaining embankment on the Tobacco River side of Wixom Lake. And to this day, we're still seeing roughly about 15 feet of head that's being maintained behind that dam. With that, obviously, given some of the impacts that occurred during the event, there are some concerns with the stability and the safety of that structure. Through various requests, including the latest federal court order, Boise Hydro was required to evaluate that remaining structure and provide mitigation measures for any dam safety concerns, as well as addressing the ongoing impacts to public safety, public transportation, and the natural resources. And unfortunately, to date, we still have not received an adequate assessment of that structure or any mitigation measures addressing those concerns. And so at this point now, the state of Michigan, EGLE and MDOT are stepping forward and pursuing to address these issues. And this first step that we are taking is we are bringing on board an engineering consultant who will be performing the necessary investigations and analyses to determine the status of the current dam, as well as to perform an alternatives analysis for addressing that myriad of issues that we discussed. And then following that, or out of that, will come a recommendation for a mitigation measure to address the dam safety concerns and the transportation and natural resource concerns. We anticipate that in the coming weeks we will have an alternative identified, and then after that it will be a matter of months or a couple months probably to get to the point where we are looking at implementing a mitigation measure yet this year. At this point in time, absent the appropriate analyses and investigations, we don't have a specified plan forward in place, but we will be keeping the public abreast of the decisions as we get that information. So that unfortunately at this point is all that I can really say on that matter right now. And unfortunately, I am a dam safety engineer, and so I know Dave mentioned a myriad of other discussions going on today, and while I do work for the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, I am not the qualified person to respond to those. But Dave, I will be able to stay on the call here to kind of listen in, and if anybody has any questions about that specific process I just talked about, I can try and speak to that at the end.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Let's move on to the next slide then, Kayla, and this is Ron Hansen from Spicer Engineering Group.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, Ron Hansen with the Spicer Group, and so we wanted to just do a recap of after the May 19th storm event and the failure of the Edenville Dam and the Sanford Dam, the Four Lakes Task Force, what we did is we had asked GEI Consulting to take a look at each one of the dams and come up with a planning level opinion of cost and concept for restoration of the dams. We covered this in detail at the last board meeting, but we wanted to recap it again. So when we're talking about the restoration, there's several assumptions with respect to the Edenville Dam. The Edenville Dam will essentially be reconstructed, which means we're planning on new spillways, new gates, and significant embankment, in most cases new embankment. The other major assumption is that hydropower will not be restored. And again, this is a planning level cost estimate, and so it assumes no restoration of hydropower. That's our best estimate given the understanding of the time and money that it would take to reconstruct the dam. Several other important design criteria. We're looking at putting in something that has a 75-year plus service life. We want to make sure that we meet the current standards of practice for dam engineering, and we also want to make sure that we meet the state of Michigan dam safety requirements, meaning the dam would at a minimum have to be able to pass what we call the half PMF, or the probable maximum flood. So we've got some concepts here when we're talking about the Edenville Dam. What we're anticipating is, number one, that the powerhouse and the gates and the majority of the spillways would be demolished or substantially modified from their existing conditions. And then secondly, we would look at constructing a new primary spillway. So the primary spillway, that's where you see the gates, and on a day-to-day basis, that's where the majority of the water flows. When we're looking at the Edenville Dam, of course, you've got the Tittabawassee River side and you've got the Tobacco River side. So each side would have its own primary spillway. And the preliminary calculations on those would suggest that we would have a 24-foot wide crest gate, 3 24-foot wide crest gates on each side of the dam, being the Tittabawassee and the Tobacco. Also, we would want the spillways to be able to pass the 100-year storm event as it goes to the normal water levels. We would also be looking at raising and reconstructing the embankment and repairing the embankment. and then constructing 2 new auxiliary spillways. The auxiliary spillways would be a labyrinth spillway, and there would be one on the Tobacco side and one on the Tittabawassee side. So this is an example of a gate, a crest gate. This is an Overmeyer gated spillway. So these are different than the gates that exist right now. The gates that exist right now are radial gates, and so you have to pull them up on a gate hoist. With a crest gate, they actually fold down. And so we would look at removing all of the current radial gates and installing all new crest gates, similar to in this picture. So here you can see an example of one actually constructed in the lower right hand of the screen. There's a picture, and there's 2 gates there. One of the gates is lowered down and it has water flowing over it, and the second one is held up holding some of the water. So there are hydraulic hydraulic arms that essentially let the gates down and pull them back up, and that's how you would control the water levels in the lake, as well as allow flood flows to pass through. With most dams, you have your primary spillway, and the primary spillway typically is where your gates are, and those gates normally need to be operated. And then you have your embankment, and the embankment is where the earthen part of the dam would be. And then you have your auxiliary spillway. And so auxiliary spillways are what we call passive spillways. They do not require operation. They typically are not used during normal flows or low flows, but if you get an extreme rainfall event and the water starts coming up, then the auxiliary spillway would kick in during high flows. So this is an example of what we're looking at in terms of an auxiliary spillway. There would be one of these on each side. And then there's the embankment. And so prior to the dam failure on the embankment for the Edenville Dam, it did not have what we would call an engineered core or a cutoff wall. Looking into the future, when we look at this picture, the proposal is that there would be what we call a sheet pile cutoff wall in the center of the dam, and that's represented by the blue hashed area that you see on the screen. And so that sheet pile cutoff wall, provides additional safety factors for the embankment, and including reducing the amount of seepage. The other thing that would be included in the new embankment is what we call filter drainage or toe drainage. On this illustration, that's highlighted by the yellow and green areas, and what that would be is a pervious material like a gravel or a sand that the water that did seep through the cutoff wall would then be collected into this filter drainage and directed to a toe drain pipe. And so when we look at the sheet pile and the filter drainage, these are really mechanisms to control seepage through the dam and keep the dam stable. Oops, can you go back on that? The other thing we would be looking at is increasing the top width of the embankment to 20 feet. Currently, or prior on the Edenville Dam, there were areas that had a narrower top width, and so having a 20-foot top width and then having flatter slopes on each side of the embankment. So the planning level opinion of cost to reconstruct the dam, providing adequate spillway capacity to pass the half PMF flood event, $208 million. And so this would meet the current state of Michigan requirements. It does not include generation of hydroelectric. It simply would be a dam to restore the lake and maintain the lake levels. These are planning level estimates. Obviously, in moving forward, detailed engineering and detailed analysis will need to be conducted, and as that occurs, the cost estimates will be better refined. But right now they have a confidence level of -30% to +50%. And they're giving consideration not only for construction, but for engineering, contingencies, construction management, permitting, and many of the efforts that go into designing and constructing a dam. So what could change and make the cost go down or make the cost go up? Obviously, the spillway capacity is a big item, and if we were to say we need to pass the full PMF, probable maximum flood, that would make the cost increase. So there's a possibility for cost increase because we have to pass the full PMS. There could also be some flood studies that establish what we call an inflow design flood, which may decrease the cost. Also, we're still subject to the findings of the independent forensic investigation team, and they may identify additional items or things that have not been considered. So that may increase the cost. There's opportunity for value engineering and optimizing the design, which may reduce the cost. And then there's an environmental restoration component. So the point is the $208 million is an estimate, and we're saying, it could be 30% lower than that, up to 50% higher than that. There's a lot of things that need to be figured out yet. But in general, when we're talking about the Edenville Dam, we're talking about a new embankment with a sheet pile cutoff wall with a filter drainage system with new press gates and new auxiliary spillways. With that, I will turn it over to Terry, and Terry will update on the erosion.
Thanks, Ron, and good afternoon, everyone. As Ron said, my name is Terry Cram. I'm working with Dave Rothman, and we're trying to understand all of the erosion issues that are around the lakes and trying to get some remedies out there for folks. Before I forget, I wanted to mention if you don't have a pen and paper by you, you might want to just grab that, because I will have some information here that you may want to write down. So we've been working with the NRCS, trying to understand all of the different erosion issues around the lakes, and trying to communicate some of that information out to the folks on the different lakes on how to remedy those erosion issues. The Four Lakes Task Force has hosted 2 erosion engineering fairs. One was in Midland County, one was in Gladwin County. What we've also done is trying to collect some data on the properties that do have erosion damage and get that entered into the GIS system. Just wanted to let you know that if you did attend the erosion fair and spoke to an engineer, your property is already entered into the database. Now, we've been working with our volunteers going out to inspect all of the individual properties that had some erosion concerns, and we've had a number, very many properties that have requested us to take a look, and we had minimal amount of volunteers to look at. So since that time, we've kind of changed our strategy, and what we're doing now is going to cut out the middleman essentially and have the NRCS go out and directly inspect these properties for funding eligibility for the erosion projects. Once that eligibility has been determined, the Four Lakes Task Force volunteers will then contact the property owners, and once the FLT has approved the site and put together a cost estimate with the Spicer Group. Excuse me. If you have not contacted the Four Lakes Task Force and you did not get a chance to attend either one of the erosion fairs, and you do have some erosion concerns on your property, please do contact us as soon as possible. The preferred method of communication for the Four Lakes Task Force is by email, and that email address is KAYYLAS@fourlakestaskforce.org. Kayla S at fourlakestaskforce.org. In your email, just please include your name and your address, your phone number, and then just give us a brief description of what your problem is and what your concern is for the erosion. If you and your computer don't really see eye to eye all the time, you can always give us a call at 989-941-3005. As I said, we would prefer communication emails, but if you want to give us a call, you can also always do that. So let's talk about the cost and how these projects are going to be paid for. Right now, we are working on getting some engineering cost estimates together for some of the projects already. And the way that those projects are going to be paid is it will be based on a cost sharing plan. 75% of that will be paid for by the NRCS, and 25% will come back to the homeowners. The homeowners should be prepared to pay that 25% of that erosion expense project. Neighbors can work together for larger projects where the erosion has affected entire neighborhoods, so that you can work together to raise those funds. If that 25% is not obtained, the project will not move forward. So that's just something to keep in mind, that we really need to have that 25% upfront before the project can move forward and start. If you are looking for some help on getting those funds, there are some very low interest rate loans out from the SBA from 1.25% to 2.5%. And to get more information on those loans, you can call the SBA at 571-422-8013 or 571-422-6016. And the third number is 571-422-0331. And just keep in mind that what we are trying to do here is we are trying to give a high estimate for the projects so that we can make sure that the entire cost of the project is covered. And if there is any extra money left over at the end of the project, that money will be sent back to the homeowners. But also keep in mind, if the cost does for some reason go high above the cost estimate, the extra amount will come back to the homeowner as well. So 75% of the project will get covered by the NRCS, and the remaining percentage will come back to the homeowner. There's a September 4th. Keep in mind, September 4th is the SBA deadline for submitting your loans. And also keep in mind that Labor Day is right in that same time frame. So I don't believe there's a cost associated with applying for those loans. So you may want to consider applying for one soon, just in case that is something that you may need. As I said, September 4th is the deadline, and you can't submit anything past that date. As far as trying to understand whether your property has been accepted and is eligible for an NRCS grant, many of the NRCS volunteers will be able to tell you, for the most part, right on the spot when they come out to look at your place. That may not be the case in every circumstance, but you might have a good idea when they come out to look at your place, to look at your erosion concerns. They may be able to give you a good idea right at that time whether or not your property would be eligible for an erosion expense, or for the eligible for the NRCS funding. Okay, and that's what I had on erosion. Now I'm going to turn it over to Don Zackett, who's going to talk about some invasive weeds.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think if you've been looking at the lake lately, you would prefer the scene prior to May compared to the one that's out there now. Next slide. So what we're seeing is since the lake drained and dried out, there's been a great proliferation of weeds. Some of these are terrestrial, what I would call noxious weeds. In the upper slide, you can see the broadleaf ones in the front on the right. Those are cockleburs. In the bottom, there's a whole variety of moist soil terrestrial weeds. And in addition, there are huge expanses of aspen seedlings in the lake bed and in the moist soil areas just inside to the center of the shoreline. You see the shoreline up there, it's sandy, not a lot of weed growth up there. There's about a 5-foot drop into what I would call spongy, moist soil. If you got on that too soon, you would lose your shoes. It's drying out now. This was taken on the east side of Wixom Lake. If you look straight up the picture towards the horizon, there's a white structure. That's the island and the large multi-story home on the end. The growth between the camera and that island is predominantly aspen seedlings. These are trees. If they're allowed to grow uncontrolled for the next 4 or 5 years, they could likely hit 10 to 15 feet tall. They will self-thin, but there'll be a barrier between the shoreline and the rest of the water that people would have to boat through once the lake is refilled. So this is a serious concern. It's one we did not predict, and we're talking with the various regulating agencies to discuss what type of treatment or management might be available for both the undesirable weeds and specifically the tree growth that is now occurring in the lake bed. The conversations are underway with the DNR, with the NRCS, so the Conservation District, the Lake Improvement Boards that handle normal weed control, and possibly still have authority to manage these weeds in the lake bed, as well as the townships and other interested parties. So we are very aware of this. The agencies they don't run into this problem frequently, and they're off trying to determine what the recommendations might be and what the best path to follow is. There are also discussions underway regarding
if we do treat the invasive weeds and trees, what would you replace them with? Because the fertile soil will want to grow something. And it may be possible to substitute a cover crop for the trees in particular. So it's an issue that we are aware of and we are waiting for input to deal with. As far as management goes, the aspens are knee-high and the stems are quite thin. We should be able to manage those either later this year or more likely next year. That's what's underway. We are trying very hard to come up with a reasonable solution to this, and it is something that has not generally been faced in Michigan before. So caught everyone a little bit off guard. That's the summary on the weeds, and I think we'll open it up now for questions.
Okay, so Kayla, where do I find the questions?
We'll just see.
Oh, okay.
So I was just going to read you some of the questions. We've been getting a lot, but okay. So one question was, if my home has no erosion, but my neighbor's house has erosion, would I be responsible for paying 25% of my neighbor's bill?
All right, so the question is, if I have a property that has no erosion problem at all and my neighbor has an erosion problem, am I responsible for paying part of his bill? And the answer is no. If your neighbor's the one with the erosion problem, then your neighbor is responsible for whatever share of the cost is required to fix that erosion problem. If you want to help your neighbor with a donation, you're certainly welcome to do it, but the properties in front of which these erosion projects are done are the ones that are going to be primarily looked to pay for the cost of erosion repairs over and above what we get from the federal government through the NRCS grants.
Another question is, how should I handle it if my neighbor has heavy equipment and is doing erosion work? Do I assume they have appropriate permits?
Right, so the question is, how do I handle it if my neighbor has heavy equipment and they're going down onto the lake bottom and doing work? Well, first of all, your neighbor should have permits for going onto the lake bottom. Their contractor who's running that heavy equipment should be contacting the Four Lakes Task Force and should at least have communicated with us that they have insurance for their work and that they're licensed contractors. We've given permission so far to 6 contractors who've done that. But if you see contractors working on the lake bottom and you're curious about whether your neighbors obtained the permits and had the contractors given permission by Four Lakes Task Force, go ask your neighbor. And by the way, we can only give permission for people to work on the lake bottom that is in Midland County. Gladwin County's lake bottom is owned by Boyce Hydro. We can't give permission for you to enter that property. That's something that we talked to Boyce Hydro about. You're welcome to contact them if you do something on the lake bottom without their permission. Technically speaking, they can have a complaint about that. Now, what they're really going to do, I can't predict, and I won't try. Yep. In the future, Four Lakes Task Force is working to acquire all 4 of the dams and all of the lake bottom it does not already own by the process of condemnation. Those papers have been filed with the courts, and now we're working on the actual work with the courts to complete the acquisition through condemnation. So once we acquire the lake bottoms through condemnation, then we'll be giving permission to people on all 4 lakes to use contractors that we've approved for heavy equipment use down on the lake beds. But right now we can only give permission in the Midland County properties. So that's all of Sanford Lake and is owned by the task force, all the lake bottom there, except for what's immediately adjacent to the Sanford Dam. And then the lake bottom in front of the Midland County properties on Wixom Lake are owned by the task force, but that's all at this point.
A handful of questions related to the new rate that we proposed to build this dam. Will it impact the normal water levels?
All right, there's a question about what water level is being designed into our plans for rebuilding the dam. And what we want to do is continue to use the court-ordered lake level orders, which is of the lake level that you saw last summer in the summertime, and 3 feet lower than that in the wintertime. So what we're planning to do is build the dams so that people do not have to change their expectations of what the lake level will be. That's the plan. Doing anything other than that is actually going to create and continuing to operate the lake at the levels it's supposed to be operated.
Can a coffer dam be built along the M30 bridge?
Someone's asking if a coffer dam can be built along the M30 bridge. I'm going to wait and see what the state of Michigan decides to do with the Tobacco River side of the dam. I don't know if they're going to find that it's safe or whether they have to do something to repair it. We simply don't know at this point. And I would defer answering that question until we know more about the condition of the Tobacco River side of the dam. If Dan Devon wants to step in and say something about this, he's certainly welcome to, but that's my understanding of it.
No, that's perfect, Dave. I appreciate that. So we have not come to any preconceived conclusions yet. That is the purpose of all of the analyses that we're proceeding with right now, and we'll be, considering that as we move forward. Yeah, at most I can say right now that we do have concerns over the safety of the dam, and that's our first priority. And then, beyond that, we'll be taking a look at, the impacts that has on the water levels.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
Can we get free engineering from Army Corps?
Okay, the question is, can we get free engineering through the Army Corps of Engineers rather than paying the exorbitant rates that our engineers charge us? Just kidding. We have actually spent a lot of time talking to the Army Corps of Engineers. And so far what we've discovered is that apparently our situation does not fit into the mission they have as the Army Corps of Engineers. We are working to try to get it to fit into their mission, but right now it does not. So they will not be doing engineering work for us until things change. And by the way, if you get the Army Corps of Engineers to do engineering for you, I believe the copay there is 50-50. So you pay half the cost of their engineering work. Would it be less expensive to repair the existing Edenville dam? And the answer is probably not, because in order to rebuild the Edenville dam, we're going to require some kinds of permits. We may not be able to get those permits without bringing the dam up to more modern standards. The thing you got to keep in mind is that we had a failure at the Edenville dam that caused some damage on Wixom Lake and more damage downstream, because both the age and the construction method for the Edenville dam were out of date. The dam was built in 1925. The design standards for dams have changed radically since then, and one of the things that Ron Hansen talked about, the impermeable core in the dam, the cutoff wall, was designed to prevent dams from saturating with water and collapsing, which is something like what happened on the Edenville dam. We want to really design a dam that we believe is going to be safe and keep the people downstream safe from another one of these dam collapses. If we are allowed to rebuild these dams after the first dam collapse, and we have another one within a few years, I think it's going to be really hard to convince people to let us rebuild them again. So let's make sure the dams have a sustainable future, and let's make sure that we keep the people on the lake and downstream of the lake safe from future dam collapses. I don't think we're going to find any appetite in the state for rebuilding the dam to 100-year-old safety standards.
At what point was not supposed to change the cost of the nurses to
So someone is asking, how will we determine what is an affordable cost for rebuilding the dams? That's a very active discussion, as you can imagine. If homeowners have to bear the entire cost, that could be a pretty big number. We are actively looking for people to help us with the actual cost of the major rebuilding step. And it's too early to say whether we're going to get that help. I would say we're probably 12 to 18, 24 months away from knowing what level of help we're going to get for reconstruction. If some federal agency or the state comes along and pays a significant part of the cost, actually that obviously has an impact on the end cost to the home property owners around the lake. So we're going to have to see what happens with getting people in the current situation. We've currently got good support at the federal level, good support at the state level. We want to see if that turns into dollars to help offset these big costs.
Does that pass through the Great Gates, or does that include water bill of the emergency spill event?
All right, Ron, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. The question, does the HAC PMF include just going through the gates, or does it include the gates plus the auxiliary spillway? So it includes the gates plus the auxiliary spillway.
Yeah, what are donations for this task force is asking for, what those donations cover?
And I expect, well, the question is what are the donations going to cover? The task force is asking for donations. We have a multi-million-dollar problem, probably $15 to $16 million over the next 2 years to start the engineering work for reconstruction of all 4 of the dams. We're going to try to do all of those more or less simultaneously because it'll speed up the time it takes to put all 4 dams back into usable condition. So some of the donation will probably go there. We also have to continue to carry out operations with our office staff, the accountants that are working with us, the lawyers who are helping us through the condemnation process and in all of the subsequent legal work that will need to be done. So the donations, at least in the short term, are going to cover the expenses we're seeing in the short term. We are asking for donations from foundations, and we're getting some donations from the foundations and also large donations from private individuals. We're also approaching the state for money, and the state would like to give us money, but last time I looked, the state has got its own money problems, so I don't know how much we're going to see from them in the next year or two. But we are actively soliciting donations, and I believe the donation that this question may be referring to has to do with a message I got today by email. The David and Patty Kepler Foundation will match donations to the task force up to $5,000, up to a total of $200,000 for continued operations. So that's what it's going to be for. It's to continue the operations of the task force during this period of time when we're building up to actual construction work on the dams themselves.
What work needs to be completed within 1 year of the dam?
Okay. So right now the state of Michigan's legislation, the law that has to do with dam construction and dam reconstruction has a deadline in it. You have 12 months from the time of a dam failure to come back to the state of Michigan with plans to rebuild the dam, and they will consider that to be a reconstruction of a dam which has previously been permitted to exist. The way the legislation is currently written, if you come back 13 months after the dam fails, now what you're doing is applying to build a brand new dam, and there are many more steps in the process to get permission to build it. So we're bending every effort to do 2 things. One is our engineers are burning the midnight oil to put together plans to have a set of permit applications ready within the time limit, which is they've got to be turned in by May 19th of 2021. At the same time, Dave Kepler and Ron Hansen were in Lansing just recently talking to the legislators in the Michigan Senate about how in a situation like ours with 4 dams that are in need of some kind of repair or rebuilding, expecting us to get all of that permitting work done in what do we have now, 10 months is not practical. And so we're looking for some changes in the legislation to give us more time to actually turn in our permit package and not need to have our construction permits treated as if they were permits for brand new construction. So that's the main thing we have to get done in the next 12 months or next 10 months is get that permit package in or get a change in state legislation.
What's the timeline when the
What is the timeline on the rebuild of the Edenville Dam? That is the dam that's probably going to take the most time to rebuild because it's got, first of all, the greatest amount of missing embankment. As I remember, the gap in the embankment on the Edenville side is somewhere in excess of 900 feet. So that will have to be rebuilt from scratch. We're going to obviously have to rebuild 2 sets of spillways where there's only 1 set of spillways for 3 dams. The dam itself has to meet a higher spillway capacity standard than any of the other dams have to meet. The Sanford Dam does not have to meet as high a spillway standard for technical reasons that you really don't want me to go into. But we're expecting the Edenville Dam to be the last one that's rebuilt as things currently look, and we're looking at having it rebuilt hopefully by the end of 2025, but it could go into 2026 with the current plans we have. That is a rough timeline. Don't take it as gospel, but the answer is we're going to spend the next 2 to 2.5 years just doing the engineering work for all these dams so that it can be submitted to the federal government or to the state government as required for approval. And there's a lot of engineering work that has to take place before we can start turning earth.
What can people that are worried about weeds do in the meantime for themselves?
So if you have a weed problem and you're worried about it, what can you do for yourself? Well, I got a wonderful photograph from my neighbor of the lake 2 days ago. It was a telephoto shot of somebody on a lawn tractor mowing the lake bottom.
In Midland County.
In Midland County.
Only.
And well, I don't know if I would do that. There are still some sinkholes out there that have swallowed up people up to their waists and above. But if the weeds are in an area where you can safely get at them, you might mow down a poplar tree or 2. But let me just say that we need to talk to the people at EGLE, which we have not done yet, to find out what they will permit without running into problems with the regulators. So my suggestion would be leave the weeds alone until we figure out what private homeowners can do on their own. Let's not have you create a problem for yourselves by getting ahead of this. But this is something we know we're going to have to deal with. And I was actually surprised to see in the last couple of weeks how much growth those weeds have put on. It's blossomed tremendously since the beginning of July. So watch this space for the answer to that question.
What's the deadline for NRCS funding for erosion control?
Ron, do you know the answer to that?
They granted a 120-day extension.
NRCS has a deadline date for applying for erosion damage funding. They also have the freedom to extend the deadline for applying for erosion funding. Something to understand is that the state of Michigan and NRCS has never dealt with a problem quite this big. The NRCS people are amazed at how much erosion damage there is around the lakes and how much they have to survey. And they are extending the deadlines because they know they can't get their inspection work done in the time period that was originally required. So they are going to spend as much time as it takes time to apply. We also know that certain properties are going to show erosion damage after this coming winter that they may not have shown this past spring. There may be some new sites that need help. We are all learning how to deal with this problem as we go along because this is a new problem for all of us. But right now you can consider that we're at least 4 months away from the deadline for applying for erosion control projects. On the other hand, if you want to make an application to FEMA for damage to your property caused by the flood, or if you want to make an application to the Small Business Administration for a homeowner's disaster assistance loan, the deadlines on those have not been extended. The deadline on those is technically September the 8th, but remember the 5th, 6th, and 7th are the Memorial Day holiday weekend, Labor Day holiday weekend, thank you. And what do you want to bet that when you come in on Tuesday, September the 8th to make your application on the last possible day, that a bunch of other people will be doing that and the phones or computer systems at the Small Business Administration will be down. I wouldn't wait. I would not wait anywhere past the 4th of September to make application to either FEMA or to Small Business Administration. Once those deadlines pass, your eligibility to apply for disaster assistance help goes away from FEMA and Small Business Administration. I've heard no indication that they're going to extend the deadlines.
Where is Freeland's task force at with the community?
Where is Four Lakes Task Force in the process of condemnation? The papers for condemnation have been filed with the courts. The next step in this is a hearing in the courts, a hearing of necessity, where we get to explain to a judge why it's necessary for Midland and Gladwin counties to condemn the Four Lakes. We'll make our argument for why it's necessary. Boise Hydro may choose to contest that argument with their own arguments why it is not necessary. That's the next step in the process, and we'll keep you apprised. When we go through that, we'll give you an feedback on what decisions were made by the court and what the next steps will be. But that's the next step that I'm aware of.
Will large trees and stumps that are deposited in flooding be removed along with debris?
So the question is whether large trees and stumps deposited during the flooding will be removed along with other debris. So let's talk about debris of three different kinds. There's debris behind dams like the Sanford Dam and a smaller amount behind the Secord Dam. I'm sorry, the Smallwood Dam. That's going to be removed by a project that we've already started with NRCS for funding. There's the debris that's on individual property, lakefront in front of their lots, that has to be removed to do erosion projects. Then there's all the other stuff that's scattered across the bottom of the lake, like beat up paddle boats, and I saw on top of a tree, and logs and stumps that are floating around free, or were floating around free. We're going to deal with that a little bit later after we get the erosion, the debris at the dams and on in front of private property dealt with. The DNR would like us to save all of the loose woody debris that's on the bottom of the lake so it can be put back in place for fish habitat when the lakes are reflooded. Okay, so that's what they want us to do with that. With the rest of the debris, unless it's interfering with our ability to meet our other goals, which is erosion damage control, weed control, or and the engineering work we're doing on the dams, debris on the lake bottom is probably going to be cleaned up in a much slower process if it is cleaned up at all. That is not currently on our list of active things we're doing, but it may turn into that in say the next summer season. We'll see where it goes, but right now that's not an active part of our program.
Is it okay to leave docks on the lake bottom?
Is it okay to leave docks and boat lifts and other things on the old lake bottom? Well, I'm leaving my dock out there because it was there before the lake went away. My neighbor's got his boat lift out there. These are things that are normally sitting on the lake bottom, and I have never heard anyone object to that. Going out to the lake bottom and putting on, let's say, an above-ground swimming pool is something EGLE will tell you you cannot do. You can plant a garden out there if you want. You can plant grass out there if you want. You can plant some shrubbery out there if you want. But don't put a structure out there. Don't put a pool out there. And I guess I'll stop with that.
Will weeds and trees be controlled in Gladwin County as well as in Midland County?
Will weeds and trees be controlled in Gladwin County as well as Midland? Don, you want to take that?
Well, I sure hope so. The control activities may be possible through the existing Wixom Lake Improvement Board. We're trying to clarify that. The Wixom Lake Improvement Board handles Tobacco Township east of M30, Jerome and Edenville on the lake. This is new to them. The Part 309 statute under which they are formed appears as if it might allow more than just aquatic weed management. So it's lake improvement, and we'll get some clarification on that. I've already spoken to the Drain Commissioner, who's the chair of that board, and we'll be getting into more detail within the next 10 days. Again, we would prefer to wait for some guidance from the DNR and from the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, on what they think the best management tool is And this way we're all moving in the same direction, at which time, and that will make getting permits, if they're required from EGLEs, easier than otherwise. So I know it's an eyesore. The terrestrial weeds, I call them noxious weeds, will perish if they're flooded. There are cattails growing in the wet areas, in the inlets and the canals that may trap water, and also in the center part, the wetter areas of the lake bed. That may be something that has to be contended with and discussed. But the trees, the poplar trees that are now knee-high, first of all, they probably need to be growing in order to be managed chemically. As Dave mentioned, the lake bed is still fairly wet, and vehicles are becoming trapped and bogged down out there. So to wait until next spring may be what ends up being recommended after leaf out next year. And if they go with a chemical treatment, if they recommend to us a mechanical treatment, if we get some frost in the ground and it stiffens up the lake bed, perhaps we can get equipment out there to mow it down. As long as these trees are kept short, they won't end up being 10 to 15 feet tall in 4 to 5 years. So that's the goal, is prevent them from protruding or growing above the depth of water that they would be in when the lake gets reflooded. So we're working on that, and understand that the Gladwin County bottomlands are owned by Boise Hydro, and the task force does not have permission to conduct activities out there at the moment. But we'll give you an update as soon as possible, and I'm not real happy with the view from my deck, so I can assure you we will be working to control these weeds, and particularly those trees.
Could you give a range for what erosion control for property may cost?
Yeah, I can explain that.
That answer really depends. Oh, sorry. Yes, the question was, can you give a range on what erosion control for a property might cost? And the answer really depends on what the size of your project is. If you've got a very large project or a very small, much smaller project. But if we had to give out, a ballpark guesstimate, at this point, it would be someplace in that range of $2,500 to $25,000, depending on the size of that project, and that would be the 25% that you would have to pay for the remaining 25% from the 75% that the NRCS paid.
When will people know an estimate on the erosion worth on their property so they can determine if they should apply for an SBA loan?
The question was, when will we know how much the erosion on our property will cost to determine if we need a SBA loan? What the process that we're going through right now is, once those properties have been determined to be eligible for an NRCS funding, that then gets drawn up into an engineering project, and then that is transferred down to Lansing. That then goes from Lansing to DC to be approved, and we're hoping that for some of the early projects we might even get something in by the end of this month. For some of the later projects it could be closer to the end of the year.
If you're concerned, you see people up four-wheeling or dirt biking in the lake bottom, if I would pay, is there a person people should call?
The question is, what might you do if you see somebody out four-wheeling or dirt biking on the lake bottom? Both the Gladwin and Midland County Sheriff have issued orders to tell people to stay off the lake bottom partly because it's private property and partly because it's just plain hazardous to go riding vehicles around in an area that's got deep mud pits and so forth. Call the county sheriff if you see this happening. The people are not supposed to be doing that.
There's a question, Dave. What do you mean when you say that the Army Corps of Engineers vision does not align with
Okay, so the question was why did I say that the Army Corps of Engineers vision does not align with the task force? So I must have pronounced the word poorly. The word I said was not vision, it was mission. The Army Corps of Engineers works on things when they're given a mission. And when they first met with us, they said, FEMA has not given the Corps of Engineers a mission to work with you. And without a mission, we can't do certain things. They are going to work with Midland County and Gladwin County on plane mapping. We have some agreement to do that. But they do not have a mission given to them by any agency of the government to rebuild these dams. That may change, but that's the current situation. Looking for more unique questions? We're looking through the list of questions, but it looks like so far we haven't found any questions on new topics in all that's been sent in. I do appreciate so many people sending questions. Did I see a question in there about the special assessment district? So people are asking when they will know how much the special assessment will be. It won't be this year that we'll know. We have too much work to do to get that answer. Ron, what is our current plan? Is it to try to have a number for people by the end of next year?
Yeah, I mean, we want to have the feasibility study kind of wrapped up by March, start engineering by March, and I would say towards the middle of next year, try to start getting these affordability numbers and financing measures in place. And I think they had a schedule for that outlined in the board meeting last July.
What we can do is we can publish on our website an estimated timeline to the extent that we know it. In order to actually know what the exact special assessment will be, we've got to have engineering plans completed and bids for the work. And so without that, all we can do is make estimates on the special assessment at this point. I don't think we're going to have an estimate until a year from now.
A few people have asked about the
The
lawsuit.
lawsuit? Which one?
Yeah, they want to know how many buildings and how that will impact what we do.
Okay, people are asking how many lawsuits have named Four Lakes Task Force as a defendant, and what are we doing? Oh, how does that affect us? I don't know the exact number right now. I know that one of the first lawsuits that named us, our lawyer called their lawyer and said, okay, first of all, the Four Lakes Task Force was not in control of the dams when the breach occurred. That law firm did not know that. Secondly, he said, well, Four Lakes Task Force doesn't have any money. So in that case, the other law firm that was bringing the suit said, oh, never mind, and they took us off the suit. So we're having those conversations with the other law firms that are bringing suit against us. We're not much of a target because we just don't have much to pay. And the fact that we had no control also provides some immunity to us. So it's somewhat of a distraction having to deal with this and having to have some of our legal fees spent doing responses and conversations with these law firms. But we're not going to let it distract us from our primary mission, which is doing the engineering, getting the erosion work done, getting the weed control work done, and planning to rebuild the dams.
So
So the question is, can people cut the stumps down to a safer level? I think that if you ask the EGLE people or the DNR people about cutting out those standing trees or stumps, you're going to find that they are absolutely opposed to the idea. The standing trees and stumps are fish habitat. They consider the area that's under DNR and EGLE regulation is all of the lake bottom up to the normal high water mark. So that's going to include all those stumps and all those standing trees. And DNR and EGLE want those left alone. So the short answer is don't do it.
There are questions from people who have gotten quotes or had conversations with other people who say they can do all of the stats.
Who've been able to do what now?
They can do all of the stats.
Oh, the building the dams, you mean? Okay, so there's some questions from people asking why it's going to take as long as we say it's going to take to do this reconstruction. We're trying to be realistic with our estimates of both cost and time. We're trying to make sure that we don't overpromise speed or cost and then underdeliver with it taking longer than we say or costing more than we say. I know other people are suggesting it can be done faster. We've had someone who's had experience working in the Army Corps of Engineers tell us he can think of faster ways to do this. We are interested in those opinions if they're coming from people who have legitimate knowledge of this field of work. Certainly happy to take those opinions and talk about it. We're not married to the idea of taking 5 or 6 years to rebuild the dams if it can be done in 3. But we also know how long it takes to do the engineering. We know how long it takes to get permit approvals. And we've at least got a rough idea of construction times. So if you've got a better idea and it's based on real personal knowledge, please contact us and help us find a faster path if that's possible.
Will the lakes be restocked with fish?
Will the lakes be restocked with fish? Absolutely. I can speak for Wixom Lake specifically. I fishing, and the state of Michigan, for as long as I can go back and find records, has been stocking over 100,000 walleyes in Wixom Lake every 2 years. I don't know where all of them go because I certainly don't catch that many, but the state will restock the lakes. Plus, there is a living stock of fish that exists in the current river that's flowing through the old riverbed. But yes, we can expect the lake to be restocked. And one positive note here is that my experience with reservoirs that are relatively new, have just recently been reflooded, is that after a year or two, the fishing is particularly good on those reservoirs. So we might have something to look forward to.
Erosion control work they've already done.
So if people do erosion control work that they've already done, or if they pay for the 25% cost share on the erosion control work that they're going to do, is there likelihood they'd ever talk about both of those, because they're two separate questions, but both useful to talk about. So let me talk about the second one. We are talking to the state of Michigan to try to find money to use for the cost match for erosion projects that we're going to be doing from this point on. The state of Michigan may or may not give us money to do this. What we're telling people to plan for is the worst case, which is that there will be no help from the state of Michigan. For work that people have already done, the NRCS grant funding program will not fund work that has been done before the property has been approved for a grant. So the answer to that is no, you're not likely to get reimbursement for work that you've already done to correct erosion. But you got it done. Yeah, it is done at least. I don't expect to get anything back for the grass seed and the mats I put down on my lake bottom. Any other questions? Okay, I think we've run past our scheduled time, haven't we? So I thank everybody for listening. If there are more questions that we find that come out of this, I believe we're in a position to provide answers for those on the website. But I think we've exhausted the general questions that people were asking. So Thanks again. Thanks for dialing in, and have a good evening.
Thanks for watching, and make sure you hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. Also make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next videos I will be posting, and leave your questions, comments, and suggestions below. As always, I just want to give a massive thanks to the people who support me on Patreon. Never underestimate the value of your contribution to keeping this channel going. Thank you.